We all know that you're not going to win or lose your fantasy league during your draft, but having a great draft will always make your season easier. But how do you win your draft? You minimize the busts and you maximize the diamonds. Headliner Nation, today's video is going to be all about looking at ADP and trying to figure out who were busts and who were diamonds. So we're going to take a look back at the 2022 data, see who was a bust, who was a diamond, and try to see if there's any characteristics between those players to determine who for 2023 will be a diamond for us. And then we'll go through several running backs and several wide receivers that I feel like could fit that diamond status. Headliner Nation, hit that like button before we even dive into it, because if this video gets 1,000 likes, I'm gonna choose someone from the comments section to win a free draft guide. And all you need to do to have a shot at that free draft guide is to leave a comment down below that says hashtag bust or hashtag diamond, and give me a player based on current ADP that you think is either a diamond or a bust and why. But let's go ahead and jump into 2022 running backs first, and we're going to take a look at the guys that were busts. And for me to consider a guy a bust, I was looking at their ADP last season, and then if they fell anywhere 10 to 15 spots or more away from that positional ADP. And also, they had to be guys that if you drafted them really ended up hurting your team. I'm not talking about a guy that you drafted in the 11th round that did absolutely nothing, because that guy didn't hurt you. He's not a bust. And honestly, I bet you thought this list was going to be a lot longer than what it is. Because really the only big bust that we had last season was going to be Jonathan Taylor, Javonte Williams, DeAndre Swift, J.K. Dobbins, and Cam Akers. All of those guys were drafted and then fell 10 to 15 spots or more lower than their positional ADP. So when you take a look at a guy like J.K. Dobbins, he was drafted as the RB23 and 54th overall player last season, but he finished as the RB52. DeAndre Swift was drafted as the RB8 and the 13th overall player last year. He only finished as the RB22. And then obviously if a guy missed any games, I put the missed games next to them. And honestly, these names are really the only busts at the running back position last year. Because if you take a look at the guys drafted based on their ADP, a lot of them still finished within 10 spots of their positional value in the draft. So maybe a guy like Leonard Fournette that you would be taking a look at, he only finished like 8 spots outside of his positional draft value. Or even a guy like Joe Mixon, he still finished as the RB12 last year. So while he didn't give you the upside you anticipated, and he was a little streaky at times, he still finished within that area that I'm not considering him to be a bust. One of the reasons I feel like people are giving running backs a bad rap right now, saying they bust way too much in the first round to pick them anymore, really only comes down to like 4 different guys. It's because of the significant amount of time missed between Jonathan Taylor this year and Dalvin Cook, Christian McCaffrey, and Derrick Henry last season. But you're going to see in just a minute why wide receivers are just as volatile as running backs. But let's take a look at the diamonds from last season. And this is the second reason why I feel like people are devaluing the running back position right now in the first round of fantasy drafts. Because there is a laundry list of names last year that kind of came out of nowhere to absolutely smash their positional value and finish much higher than what you drafted them. The majority of the list was drafted as RB30 or lower, and almost all of them were outside the top 80 picks of the draft. The highest one of the group drafted was Josh Jacobs, but he also may have been the best value for anyone last season because he was drafted in the 50s and finished as the RB3. So once again, I want to reinforce one of the main reasons that people are saying, oh, I want to go running back late is because of the guys currently mentioned on the screen. But heading into 2023, realistically, do we think we're going to see this list of guys again pop up at the end of your draft that are going to become solid fantasy contributors the entire season? Or was this more of just a one-off thing? Because if you truly think there's going to be 8 running backs that are going to smash their positional value in drafts the way that these guys did, then it makes a lot of sense to wait on running backs late. But you're not going to have 8 guys every single year that do this. But before we jump in and talk about the wide receivers, receivers, let's take a look at the characteristics of these running backs and see if we can pinpoint any guys that also meet that criteria for 2023. Now, really, they fall into three characteristic groups for me. There's the bounce back candidates, similar to Josh Jacobs and Miles Sanders last season. There's the backup breakouts, kind of like Tony Pollard and Ramondre Stevenson. And then there's your rookies, Dameon Pierce, Isaiah Pacheco, guys like that kind of come out of nowhere to take over a backfield. All of these guys are being drafted in the late 60s or further back over an underdog right now. And for the purposes of this video, I am going to use underdog ADP because it seems a little bit more realistic right now, even though it's different than what redraft ADP would at this point of the year. And just a reminder, if you're wanting to get our draft guide for free, create an underdog account and use code word headliners when you deposit a minimum of $10. Because not only are you going to get your deposit matched by underdog up to $100, but you're also going to get a free fantasy football draft guide from us. This thing normally costs $21.99 and it's only going to cost you $10. And if you're one of the first 1,000 people to sign up with us, you're also going to have an opportunity to pick a piece of memorabilia straight from Jake's office. So head on over to Underdog, use code word headliners when you make your deposit of at least $10, get your free draft guide, get your deposit matched, and get entered to win. Plus, why wouldn't you want to draft against us? So guys like J.K. Dobbins, DeAndre Swift, Rashad Penny, Javonte Williams, and Alvin Kamara. All of those guys fall into that bounce back category for me. People have lost their trust in them for one reason or another, or are worried about something that has to do with them, but they could end up being just fine this season and smash that ADP value that you would get them at. What about for backup breakouts? James Cook, Khalil Herbert, Brian Robinson, and Rachaad White. Guys that really didn't get a ton of opportunity last year, but we saw a little bit of them. And because of that, we feel like heading into 2023, they could be a really big breakout candidate. What about the rookies? Guys like Roschon Johnson, Devon Achane, Chase Brown, and Tank Bigsby. These are all rookies that could at some point in time take over for the current starter, whether it be for an injury or other reasons. Now, these guys are probably the most volatile because they're going to have something significant happen for them to actually take over as the starter and give you the type of fantasy value that you would need to be able to play them every single week. And also keep in mind, this list is not a comprehensive list. There are other guys that we could throw out there as well. So don't forget, hit the like button. And if you leave a comment down below with a guy that you feel falls into one of these categories and we hit 1,000 likes, I'm going to pick one of you to win a draft guide. So let me know down below someone that I may not have covered. All right, moving over to wide receivers, let's talk about the busts there first. There are going to be significantly more names on this list than what you probably realized. But keep in mind, one of the reasons why is because if your league starts 3 wide receivers and you drafted one of these guys to be a starter in your lineup and they didn't provide that, that would be considered a bust. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the wide receiver position is more volatile than running back just because there's more names mentioned here, but it does mean that you have to take a look at wide receivers and may understand that running back isn't way more volatile than what they are. The few guys here at the top of the list that you're seeing are not the most bust-worthy candidates of this group. All of them were probably drafted to be like your wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3, but unfortunately, they still fell significantly outside their positional ADP value. The guys at the lower end of this list are the ones that really ended up hurting you last season. Keenan Allen, Deontay Johnson, Deebo Samuel, Cooper Kupp, Michael Pittman. All of these guys had very volatile years or dealt with injuries, and because of that, they did not help return any of this value for you. And when you take a look at the data, there was only 2 running backs last year that were drafted as top 12 running backs that didn't meet their positional value. But there were 4 wide receivers that were drafted as top 12 wide receivers that didn't meet their positional value. And again, all of these guys finished 10 to 15 spots or more lower than the ADP that they were drafted at for their position. So I'm sorry to keep beating this drum, but once again, the numbers show us that running backs are not inherently more volatile than wide receivers. And wide receivers are not just automatically safer than running backs. Now, here's where things get really interesting, because I thought the running back list was long for Diamonds. Check out the wide receiver list. There are 14 wide receivers that I looked at last season that far exceeded their ADP positional value. The biggest thing to come with this, that 5 of these wide receivers listed here all finished inside the top 12 wide receivers. Christian Kirk was drafted as the wide receiver 40 and finished as the wide receiver 11. Devontae Smith was drafted as the wide receiver 37. He finished as the wide receiver 10. Amari Cooper was the wide receiver 29. He finished as the wide receiver 9 on the season. Amon-Ra St. Brown was the wide receiver 26. He finished as the wide receiver 8. And Jalen Waddle, who was drafted as wide receiver 19, finished as wide receiver 7. But then just outside of that, Tyler Lockett. He was drafted as wide receiver 42, finished as wide receiver 13. Brandon Ayuk was drafted as wide receiver 38, finished as wide receiver 15. Garrett Wilson was the wide receiver 49, finished as the wide receiver 19. And Chris Olave, who is the wide receiver 44, finished the season as the wide receiver 25. Just look at the names on the screen in front of you and continue to try and argue with me that it's much easier to find running backs later than it is to find wide receivers later. I mean, come on, 7 of the top 20 wide receivers last season were picked 60th or later in your draft. All right, I'm sorry. Listen, I've done a lot of videos recently that just continue to reinforce the fact that running backs at the beginning of your draft are inherently more valuable than wide receivers. And listen, if you want to take a wide receiver in the 1st or 2nd round, that's absolutely okay. I am not telling you that you don't draft wide receivers early. You just don't draft multiple wide receivers over running backs early. So if you want to take a wide receiver in the 1st round, then go running back afterward. Or take a running back in the 1st round and then go wide receiver running back. But if you're still going to argue with me that taking 2 to 3 wide receivers to start your draft, or 3 of your first 4 picks being wide receivers, or something like that, I am sorry, but there's just no more argument for you other than you just like to do it, because there is no data that shows you anywhere that actually helps you more times than not. I'm sorry, I have to laugh because this is like the 4th video I've done that has proved that point. All right, but let's take a look at the Diamonds potentially for this season. What are some characteristics that we need to look for them? We're gonna be taking a shot at rookies, players that are in a pass-heavy offense, or players with big play potential. Now, the main rookies that we're taking a look at this year are Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison, and Quentin Johnston. These are the 3 guys that you take a look at as rookies that really have the best opportunity to help their team right away. And if you really wanted to, you could throw Jalen Hyatt in here as well, but I'm not as big of a Jalen Hyatt fan as other people. What about for a pass-heavy offense? There's a few guys that fit into that category. Players like Kadarius Toney and Sky Moore from the same team in the Chiefs. Those are definitely guys that we could be taking a look at. Brandon Cooks is in a pass-heavy offense, and he's a bounce-back player that could really help you out. And Michael Thomas also falls into that same guideline here. The biggest issue there with him is last season, he was being drafted as like a top 20 wide receiver. This year, he's not even close to that. Now, as far as big play potential, Tyler Lockett, I don't know how this man continues to be so disrespected on a yearly basis. I might be the biggest fan of Jackson Smith-Njigba, but even I know that Tyler Lockett is still going to get his this year. So his big play potential will continue to be there. Gabe Davis and George Pickens, both of these guys. Gabe Davis definitely could bounce back. It is not his fault that he injured his ankle, and it is surely not his fault that Josh Allen injured his elbow last season. Big things could be in store for him this year. And George Pickens, I've covered him in the draft guide so many times at this point that I don't even have anything else to say about him. And then guys like Nico Collins and Alec Pierce, I both believe believe that they could end up being big-time playmakers for their offenses as well. And again, this is not a comprehensive list, but this is a few of the names that fall into these categories listed above that are being drafted as the wide receiver 30 or later right now. So again, leave me a comment down below. Is there a player, a wide receiver here that I missed that you look at being drafted like wide receiver 30 or later that you say, hey, this is a guy right here that absolutely fits the criteria and I think could end up being a huge ADP diamond this year? All right, Headliner Nation, I think I've wore the subject out enough. I mean, what do you want me to talk about anymore when it comes to running back versus wide receiver? There is nothing. So make sure you're taking in all of this information. And even in the past, if wide receiver heavy has worked for you, it doesn't mean it's going to work every single year. Stay fluid in your draft and be willing to listen to different counterpoints to see if it could actually help you get even better. But for now, Headliner Nation, I'm going to get out of here. Make sure you hit that like button and leave a comment down below. If you're new here and this is one of your first videos, we didn't dive too deep in this one, but we do go super deep in others. So make sure you subscribe and check out all the other videos on the channel. Peace out, Headliner Nation. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll catch y'all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.